weather in New York.
Nice, very nice.
Yeah, it's nice
Feels like
today.
70 else.
Yeah, chilly, but nice.
It's nice.
Okay, so let's start with our prayer. We elevate our thoughts. We calm ourselves down. We ask for the blessing and assistance of the spiritual benefactors, for the guiding and inspiration for our studies of this morning, for the guidance and protection of our speaker. We ask to be inspired so we can all together learn, understand, more important, be able to put in practice on our daily lives all the teachings we're about to receive. We ask for special blessing and protection for all those still struggling with this pandemic, that they may find peace, acceptance, resignation to overcome the challenges, and above all, faith. We ask for those who won't be able to join us this morning, for those who will join us later. Thankful for this wonderful opportunity of once again being reunited in the name of our Master Jesus, with our hearts full of gratitude, we ask permission to start our meeting. So be it. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are very happy to have Luis Vilaça here once again with us to give the second part of his presentation on instinct and intelligence. For all those that watched the first part, you see how deep and profound the teachings are, and how relevant to our studies of Spiritism. So without further ado, I'll pass to Luis to continue his presentation. Thank you, Luis.
Thank you, João, for the kind words. I have a lot of material today. I know I cut maybe 30% because of due to our time limitations, but I still think we have a lot of beautiful stuff here. So, but you guys will let me know later. I know that you don't usually like my summaries, but I think today is very appropriate that we use one or two slides to remember what we discussed last month. In the first part of our instinct and intelligence talk, we highlighted that intelligence is not an attribute of the vital principle. It is just a special faculty that a few classes of organic beings have. Instinct, according to Spiritism, actually according to the Spirit's book, is a non-reasoning intelligence. It is a good definition. Jesus. I start to think in English. It's tough to go Portuguese in English, but Joana de Angelis shared with us that according to her, existing studies on instinct are complex, and it's not a theme of a single meaning. Reminding you of a Freudian view of the human personality, that we're going to use today. Remember, we have the ego, the id, and the superego, according to Freud. And the id is the instinct. The ego is our reasoning conscious part, and the superego is related to ethical and moral concepts. So, according to Freud, a healthy ego provides us the ability to adapt to the reality that surrounds us by means of intelligence. It does so that it is acceptable to the instinctive needs and to our unconscious, to our moral and ethical parts of personality. So this is a summary of the first part. Then we discussed the brain, and it's always important to remind that intelligence needs material implements, needs the brain to express itself. But we should not confuse brain function with intelligence. Intelligence is an attribute of the spirit. You see a picture on the left. We discussed about the three kinds of brains, the reptile brain, the limbic brain where the emotions are, the neocortex, the rational brain. Anyway, but after that, or I don't remember exactly the order, but I brought to you, or I brought to this, to our talk, content from an André Luiz book that, in my view, firmly supports the concept that one of the organs that we have in our perispirit is the brain. Meaning, we have a brain in our Jesus, my English is bad today. In our incarnated body, but we also have a brain in our perispirit. As we learned, and João, did a talk about the organs in the perispirit. So I'm plainly convinced of that. And I think we do have support and reference from strong spiritist books regarding that. I like to think, and I invite you to think with me, that if we shift a little bit, we could say that while we are incarnated and we are not, in a situation of emancipation of the soul, we have our perispirit here with us, and our spiritual brain is here with us. So we could think that what happens is that our brain is the combination of our incarnated brain and the perispiritual brain, providing us with the means for our spirits to interact with the incarnated world. I like that view. I think it's a view that's interesting for us to have. That our brain is part of the nature, and it encompasses the organ that is in the perispirit. I hope that's challenging for you. And the last item I already mentioned, the primitive brain, the limbic brain, and the neocortex. So let's move on. Today we have a lot of material, essentially on two topics, but we will start with the historical development of the human intelligence, because I think it provides us with interesting analysis and possibilities of understanding things. Material from the Brazilian Spiritist Federation tells us that the development of human intelligence is clearly delineated with the humanization of the intelligence principle, something that occurred gradually over the millennia. We're going to see that this millennia, we could think of hundreds of millennia. Along with the conquests of intelligence comes free will, a condition that transforms the human into the builder of his own destiny, or its own destiny. It's wrong there. Hello, Carol, good to see you here. From the earliest times, human intelligence has been broadening by the acquisitions obtained in the innumerable reincarnations of the spirit and in its stages on the spiritual plane. I am reading the slides because I know there's people there who does not have the image. So the essence here is that we have been improving as humans through the millennia, both while incarnated and while we were in the spiritual plane, broadening our intelligence and our capabilities. This according to Spiritist doctrine. André Luiz, yes.
Good morning. Do you want us to, I'm sorry, I was a little bit late. Do you want us to interrupt for questions or save for the end?
It's up to you, but I have a lot of
No,
material
it's up to
today.
you.
So,
I'll leave to the end then.
okay, Elmo. Anyway, André Luiz, in Between Heaven and Earth, tell us that just as the perfect physical vehicle of man was born from the primary forms of nature, the spiritual body was also initiated into the rudimentary principles of intelligence. Primitive humans have spent centuries and centuries to become rarefied, using multiple forms in order to conquer superior qualities that, in subutilizing their organization, will confer them new possibilities of consciential growth. Wow. Instinct and intelligence gradually transformed into knowledge and responsibility, and similar renewal gave the being more advanced manifestation equipment. We see that André Luiz here essentially, what I'm is citing a text that confirms that. Let's go a bit towards scientific stuff. Anthropology indicates that human beings belong to the group of mammals called primates, which currently have more than 330 species, like lemurs, monkeys, and the great apes. We humans, according to science, anthropology actually, derive from an evolutionary branch of a group of apes, which occurred about 5 or 6 million years ago in Africa. Those of you who are seeing the image, this would be that group, and oh, it's not seeable. I don't see there, so for some reason my mouse does not show. Anyway, top line towards the left is us evolving. And the new hominids that, derived from the group of apes had unique characteristics: reduced canines and bipedalism. The first of this group that we could point out would be the Australopithecus. Robert Winston, in Human Instinct, it's a book that we used on the first part already, tells us that the uprighting of the spine and the bipedal ability were fundamental aspects of anatomy that made such ancestors superior to apes. It is believed that such characteristics have appeared somewhere between 4.2 to 2.5 million years ago in the Australopithecus. There's an image on the left, arbitrarily saying 3 million years ago. It shows that the Australopithecus had around 1.2, 1.3 meters average height, so they were fairly smaller than the current humans. Continues Winston. What made primitive humans walk on 2 legs instead of 4? Whatever the exact sequence of events that led our ancestors to walk on 2 legs, we know that the upright posture was fundamental to the survival and success of the species. For hominids, another really important thing came with the practice of walking on 2 legs. Standing upright means having their hands free. We spiritists could think of interesting reasons why primitive humans changed posture. And I think it's totally acceptable that there was a spiritual influence for this to happen. with all the knowledge that we know about the spiritual influence in Earth, solar system, the universe as a whole. So I would say that a decision was made for this path to start to happen. In Genesis, chapter 11, it is 14 and 15. By the way, this is the 2003 edition. Kardec tells us that the body is simply an envelope to receive the spirit. Consequently, its origin and the materials of which it is composed matters little. Continues Kardec, from the similitude which exists between body of man and that of the monkey, certain physiologists have contended that the former was only a transformation of the latter. In that, there is nothing impossible, nor, if so, does it affect the dignity of man. You will see some things highlighted in red, is because this particular edition of the Genesis in English has some mistranslations, and this is one of those. So if you guys have the book with you, just make a note. Continues Kardec. Bodies of monkeys may have served very well for the vestment of the first human spirits, necessarily undeveloped, who have been incarnated upon earth. These garments, being more appropriate to their needs and for the exercise of their faculties than the bodies of any other animal. Instead of a special robe being made for the spirits, he found a ready-made one. Such an ordering of the body is not prejudicial to the spirit. So here, Kardec clearly tells us that somewhere along the development of the human, even while the human was not what we call humans today, spirits were incarnated or being incarnated. When did this happen? I don't know. I couldn't find a reference if we are talking about 500,000 years or 2 million years ago, to 40,000 years. But I don't have any reference on information told us by the spirits regarding this. I got a message here, bad internet. I hope it does not affect you. We don't know if those spirits that were incarnating in the primitive humans, were they those spirits? Were they spirits from other planets that came here to bootstrap our development? That's an interesting question. We know that this has happened 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years before Christ, but I couldn't find a reference sustaining that spirits from different planets came to incarnate in our primitive humans before that. If you guys have them, please share with us, João, Elmo, and others. Moving on. In evolutionary terms, it is assumed that 1 million years after the uprising of the spine, Australopithecus evolved into what we call the genus Homo, the lineage that led to the current human species, the Homo sapiens sapiens. This evolution gave the primitive human exceptional abilities, such as carrying its own small children, carrying objects, carrying food, harvesting and transporting fruits and vegetables, and building and using tools. The genus Homo reveals an outstanding flourishing of intelligence, although there is no scientific humanity as to how this has occurred. This comes from a text by UNESCO on human evolution and its social-cultural aspects. Were this an Spiritist text, we probably could say that, well, we have a good idea on how this flourishing intelligence might have happened, wouldn't we? From the same test from the University of São Paulo, there's no consensus on the explanation for the development of mental abilities of members of this group. A number of scientists claim that this development was due to the manufacture and use of tools. Others say that it's also due to the variation in diet provided by the use of tools. Roots, tubers, meat. Again, I believe we Spiritists could give, a few good ideas on the development of mental abilities of this group. For us, with what we know, it would be very reasonable to assume that this came from the spiritual world. Allan Kardec, in Genesis, same chapter as before, he tells us that the body is, at the same time, the envelope and the instrument, of the spirit. And as the latter acquires new aptitudes, it is reinvested with an appropriate envelope for the new kind of work which it must accomplish. Continues Kardec, in order to be more exact, it is necessary to say that it is the spirit itself which fashions its envelope and appropriates it to its new needs. It brings it toward perfection, develops and completes the organism by measure, as it experiences the need of manifesting new qualities. In a word, it makes his physical body in accordance with his intelligence. It's clear for us that the vision that Kardec is projecting towards us is that the evolution of the human along the ages has happened directed by the spirit that was inhabiting that incarnated body. And as we, as spirits, developed our intelligence and capability, we directed our body to change. That's an interesting view. I like it. And it's very coherent with scientific vision. Going back to the text from São Paulo University, about 1.5 or 1.8 million years ago, a remarkably important event occurred with Homo erectus. The discovery, control, and use of fire. Definitely the fire was a dividing element in the story of human development. Such conquest made primitive man develop safer and more comfortable ways of survival, building shelters to protect against cold and animal attacks, working wood to build dwellings, traps to capture animals, cooking meat and other food, facilitating digestion and absorption of nutrients. How this has happened? I make this parenthesis here because I find it very interesting. There is a scientific proposition called intelligence design It's, by the way, it's now religious. This is one of the books, probably one of the first books by Paxton and others, The Mystery of Life's Origin. But the argument here is this. The evolutionary changes that have occurred on Earth, not only in human development, have happened at a speed that would not be possible by the mere process of spontaneous mutation and natural selection. We all know about Darwin's natural selection. We see it happening around us. Probably we all studied that darker butterflies in areas with dark tree trunks have a better chance of survival than clear butterflies, so they predominate. It's accepted by almost all groups that natural selection exists and happens. The thing is, a group of scientists is questioning, using actual statistical data, if much more complex changes in biological beings could, happen just by natural selection. And a number of those academics have actually proven by calculation that certain species, just like us humans, change too much along a short period of time for that to be able to be, a mere case of chance, a mere case of mutation that is selected by living conditions. So what they say is, well, some sort of interference has to have happened for those changes to, to have occurred so fast. And that's essentially the proposition called intelligence design. And I think that's very, very intriguing. We spiritists, would have a list of possible explanations for that. But the truth is, there is a lot of prejudice against this movement in the academic environment because they qualify it as creationists, associated to religion, non-scientific, etc. But I find it very, very intriguing. It's one of those things that I believe will eventually be accepted because it makes a lot of sense to, incarnated science. For us spirits, is almost, although not reported by any reference that I have, it's a consequence, an obvious consequence of everything that we learn. But we go on. The Homo erectus also developed language. Oh boy. Language was another breakthrough of the Homo erectus. Not only fire, but language. Language allows us unlimited communications about all aspects of reality, concrete and abstract, present and absent. We become able to talk about the past and the future. Almost, I've heard of one tribe in South America, I don't remember where, that did not have the concept of time, of verbal, not only verbal, but of the changing of time. Every other group of humans around the globe every other group was able to create the concept of present, past, sometimes future, and discuss abstract things, something that has happened, something that will happen. According to Robert Winston, this allowed for the reinvention of the cultural world, standing beyond the direct physical experience of the here and now. It's easy to see it as a breakthrough, isn't it? Through language, man learns to communicate, to send warning signals, and to exchange learning. There seem to be other species that are able to exchange learning. For instance, today, scientists believe that the orcas, those whales, they somehow are able to teach their children different hunting techniques to actually develop the new way to hunt and to teach to their offspring. But this is very rare and definitely doesn't seem to be symbolic. It's probably by example. Eva Jablonka and Marlon Land in Evolution in Four Dimensions, we have used this work before as well, tells us that the distinguishing factor of human beings is our ability to think and communicate through words and other symbols. Symbols are a diagnostic trait of human beings. It seems that in our globe, only as humans use symbols. Rationality, linguistic ability, artistic skill, and religiosity are facets of symbolic thought and communication. So we have been evolving. Again, I remember this is not chicken soup. This is hard steak. We have to cut and swallow it. During our evolvement as humans, directed by the spiritual world, we have been developing intelligence and skills, and we have been shaping our incarnated bodies to better use those skills we have been developing. And eventually got into symbolic thoughts and our ability to teach things to one another. This learning process, human learning, is an integrated process that causes qualitative transformation in the mental structure of the learner. Intellect, and intelligence, they transform. Human learning is different from that which takes place in animals, because in humans we observe willingness or intent to learn, such as you're listening to this odd guy, sharing things with you. Persistent dynamism in the search of new information, and creativity in using methods that enhance one's knowledge. This comes from Eva Jablonka. Human learning can be broadly understood as the acquisition of new knowledge through the development of skills, resulting in changes in behavior. Social learning, that part of learning that have to do with social interchange, has been a remarkable evolutionary factor in humans. It's a change in behavior that results from social interactions with other individuals. In incarnated humans, I would say that our search for involvement as spirits, while incarnated, could be easily identified with social learning. That's something that has happened, to us as spirits, and that we have been perfecting and incorporating along the ages. It is fantastic that we are being able to do this here incarnated, talking to each other, exchanging information, and trying to become, better humans. A parenthesis, I removed most of it, but I couldn't, not mention Piaget. This guy at your left is John Piaget, probably one of the greatest exponents of the study of learning. He presented very innovative concepts. He studied reason deeply, how we learn. I would say that many of the current pedagogic schools derive from Piaget. My mother loves Piaget. She studied him. If Paco were here, I'm sure he would have something to say about Piaget. In his work, just to mention a few words by him, Biology and Knowledge, chapter 5, Piaget shares with us that he believes there are three major kinds of knowledge. The hereditary forms, of which instinct is the prototype, whose content refers to innate information. The logical mathematical forms that we have been progressively building, that happens in relatively higher levels that characterize intelligence. He means higher levels of our seek. And third, the forms acquired as a result of experience. That's Piaget's view of knowledge. Now that we have talked about, or we have discussed, the evolution of the human species, the acquiring of skills, a few parentheses, then we began to be able to learn, to interchange knowledge, use intelligence for that. But we also have knowledge that's not a result of intelligence, that instinctive knowledge. Let's go about human intelligence. Going back to Tabor Davis in Tiber's medical dictionary, Tabor tells us that for medicine, intelligence is the ability to understand and make relationships, to solve problems, to adjust to new situations. That's probably the fifth or sixth or seventh definition of intelligence that we have discussed anyway. We must point out that intelligence is not the same as intellect. They are related concepts, but they are not synonyms. Intellect is the faculty of thinking and acquiring knowledge. Trying to break that down. Intellect is translated as the possibility of knowing, the possibility of understanding and learning, always enabled by intelligence. A primitive human, for instance, is considered or might be considered to be intelligence, but he's not intellectualized, as his knowledge is scarce. In contrast, the intelligence of the genius has a high degree of intellectuality from the accumulated knowledge, possibly through countless reincarnation experiences. So intelligence is the means for us to become more intellectualized, to gather more knowledge. The picture, this kid, many times reincarnated and knows a lot of stuff, is very, very intellectualized. According to the material from Brazilian Spiritist Federation, intelligence and intellect evolve gradually, like everything in nature. Intelligence, properly speaking, begins when the being starts to emit continuous thought. Begins with the humanization of the intelligence principle, sorry. I don't have a good definition for continuous thought, but I reproduce it here because it was the best reference I could find. Intellectual capacity develops with the acquisition of knowledge. Allan Kardec tells us in the Spiritist's book, chapter 9, that God has created our spirits equal, but each of them has lived over a longer or shorter amount of time and has consequently developed more or less aptitudes. The difference lies in the degree of experience and volition and eagerness. The difference lies in their free will, by which some advance more rapidly than others. So, as learning varies in individuals, their evolutionary positions will be different, obviously. And decodification explains this very, very clearly. Joanna de Angelis, in a book called The Conscious Being, I don't think this book has been translated to English. Well, she tells us that the thinking creature is still an incomplete being in a constant process of improvement, of transformations, in a prolonged effort to develop the psychophysical, parapsychological, and mediumistic potentials in it in latency. The evolution process is incessant, and the changes, the transformations are continuous. I made a point to place this picture for those who do not have the image. It's a bronze image that you probably have seen somewhere by Rodin called The Thinker. It's a guy thinking. That's us, huh? Thinking. And you guys are thinking, what the hell is Luis telling us? Anyway, I hope I'll be able to tie it in the end.
The Conscious Being was just published by Leo Publisher in English, just released.
I didn't know. That's good.
Yeah.
One more book for you guys to read in English. For philosophy, here goes one more definition. Intelligence obtained a scientific consensus from the thought of René Descartes, again Descartes, for whom human intelligence should be considered as the ability to reason based on memory. So for Descartes, intelligence is the ability to reason based on memory. So intelligence is seen as a synonymous of cognition that later Jean Piaget defined as a logical mathematical function of our personality, of our brains, if I might say so, using the word spirit. Those two concepts by Descartes and Piaget generated some conclusions that resulted in a lot of repercussions. Some wrong, some classically wrong, but among them, and this is one that I want to point out, well, if intelligence is that, it is possible to measure human intelligence and classify intelligence on a scale that was initially called intelligence coefficient. So we would be able to grade intelligence and to compare intelligence. And this idea brought the notion that eventually became what is still today called the IQ, the intelligence quotient, something that we can measure and allow us to or would allow us to classify humans according to their intelligence. It was later found, however, that IQ tests only measured cognitive ability. And even while measuring cognitive ability, it does in a very generalized way. So IQ tests should not be considered in isolation. They should not be considered as a good measure of intelligence. Unfortunately, it still will today in some sense, not as much as before, but it's a very, very incomplete way to try to measure and compare, intelligence among humans. But it reflects something that would be our cognitive ability. It is known today that intelligence is not a compact, rigid, and indissoluble unit which represents the author of reason, as it was imagined. This comes from the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, and I reproduce it here word by word because it's such a pompous phrase. Intelligence is a set of capabilities that go beyond logical mathematical reasoning, and this is important. Intelligence is developed in the spiritual being by means of a stimuli along the existence, developed in successive reincarnations. This is the Spiritist view. We as humans have an intelligence. It has been under development as we evolve through the ages, and will be continuously developed further on, depending on each of us and our capacity of using our free will to become better, more capable, more intelligent, with a better intellect. You are doing this today, by the way. Going back to Descartes, his vision of intelligence as the human capacity to reason has been propagated until today. This guy, by the way, that's an image of Descartes. I don't know where it came from. I don't remember, sorry. There is his famous phrase, ego cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. In Portuguese, penso, portanto existo. However relevant the contributions of Descartes, only one aspect has been focused by them: rational intelligence, also known as mathematical and logical intelligence, or formal logical thinking. That's a part of intelligence. You might even say that's a small part of intelligence. Rational intelligence uses reasoning and reason in decision making in order to solve problems or challenges. And that works pretty well. It brought us here. But in this situation, our rational minds work towards an adequate solution, actually without involvement or with a reduced participation of emotions and feelings. The point being that just rational intelligence does not apply well to all sorts of problem solving or challenges or human challenges that we live every day around it. The Brazilian Spiritist Federation recommends to us that reason must not contradict emotions and feelings. And it tells us, listen, the ethical conflicts that occur or that might occur, with us when choosing a path are a sign that something is not right or might not be right in the moral field. Thus, we should, in any rational decision, necessarily weigh the moral consequences. Trying to reconcile what reason tells us and what our feelings and emotions, inspiration tells us. To try to guarantee the peace of the spirit. That's obviously an essential factor in life. That's interesting, isn't it? Let's talk about intelligence dimensions. Oh boy. So, mathematical reasoning is not the only reason, not the only kind of reason, the only kind of intelligence. What are the others? I'm getting very close to us already. In the 60s or 70s, no, let's say the 70s, this gentleman on the left, Howard Gardner, he's a cognitive psychologist at Harvard University. He developed a theory of multiple intelligences. And in his book, Multiple Intelligences, he tells us that in a traditional view, intelligence is operationally defined as the ability to respond to intelligence items. His theory of multiple intelligences just pluralize this traditional concept. Now, an intelligence, a kind of intelligence, implies in the ability to solve problems or develop products that are important in a given environment or social community. The ability to solve problems allows the person to address a situation in which a goal must be achieved and locate the appropriate route to that goal. So, by identifying those environments and those goals and the characteristics using a statistical way that is not that interesting to us here, he came up with 7, later 8 dimensions of intelligence. What would they be? They would be spatial intelligence, musical intelligence, verbal intelligence, logical, mathematical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, kinesthetic, intelligence. And later he added naturalistic intelligence. I had a number of slides here, but I will resume in just one. For those who do not have the image, I'm showing just a graph that has the 8 types of intelligence related by Gardner with a catch kind of smartness. And the roles, let's say, that people in society have in which this particular kind of intelligence is a differential, is present in a high degree. So for instance, bodily kinesthetic intelligence would be persons who are body smart. You typically see that in dancers, in actors, in athletes. Logical mathematics has to do with being number smart. You see it in like scientists, accountants, engineers. Linguistic intelligence is being word smart. You see it in writers, presenters, lawyers, comedians. Naturalistic intelligence has to do with being nature smart. You see it in gardeners, veterinarians, farmers. Musical intelligence, that's easy, is being music smart. You see it in singers, in musicians, in composers. Spatial intelligence is being picture smart. You see it in architects, in artists, photographers, pilots. Interpersonal intelligence, people smart, teachers, doctors, politicians, salesperson. Intrapersonal intelligence is being self-smart. You see it in writers who are able to introspect, in philosophers, in researchers. Obviously, all that is combined. So the idea here is to sell to you that our intelligence is not limited to logical mathematical. We have a lot of other characteristics that are intelligence, they're part of intelligence, and they're not measured by IQ. Very, very difficult to compare. Very, very difficult to place a finger on. Then probably Eric was going to ask me, we hear so much about emotional intelligence. It's not one of those. The concept of emotional intelligence, I'm pretty sure you have heard about, was popularized by an American journalist, not a scientist, a psychologist named Daniel Goleman in 1995. His point is that although we see emotional intelligence in the concept of intrapersonal, interpersonal proposed by Gardner, he believes that there's a vast field that was not part of Gardner mapping. So in his words, and by the way, this on the left is the cover of his book. I have this book in English. This is the 10th anniversary edition. It has an interesting preface. Anyway, he tells it. There is one dimension of personal intelligence that is broadly pointed to, but little explored in Gardner's elaboration, the role of emotions. Perhaps this is so because, as Gardner suggested to me, he actually interviewed Gardner, this Daniel Goleman. Gardner's work is so strongly informed by a cognitive science model of mind that his view of intelligence emphasizes cognition. Even when he mentions abilities that are not logical mathematical, he's always focused on cognition, on reasoning, on intelligence based on reasoning. And going back to Goleman's words, the understanding of oneself and of others in motives, in habits of working, and in putting that insight into use in conducting one's own life and getting along with others. The realm of emotions extends beyond the reach of language and cognition. So essentially, this is the thesis that Daniel Goleman brings to us with emotional intelligence. There's a kind of intelligence that's not cognitive. It goes beyond language and cognition. And he continues, while there's ample room in Gardner's description, Gardner and those who work with him have not pursued in great detail the role of feeling in this intelligence, focusing on cognitions about feelings. This leaves an unexplored and rich sea of emotions that makes the inner life and relationships so complex, so compelling, and so often puzzling. About this, Joana de Angelis has something to say. This comes from the book Personal Triumph that I believe has not been translated to English, and I forgot to put the number of the chapters. Oh no, the chapter, the thinking being, sorry, that's not numbered. Item intelligence. And take note, this was written in 2001, okay? We'll use this date later. Joanna D'Angeli tells us that the intellectual quotient, the IQ, prevailed. She means the mathematical logical reasoning, the cognitive view of intelligence, until the moment when another form, another expression of intelligence was detected, probably has been detected would be better English, it was my translation, which became known as emotional intelligence, one that allows the perception and understanding of one's own feelings, as well as those of other people. Continues Joanna. Thanks to this achievement and understanding of values, human beings have become more enriched through the development of their EQ, of their emotional quotient, developing dormant resources and aptitudes that give them amplitude for human and social relationships, as well as for the balance of emotions and for the success in the endeavors undertaken. So what we have learned here is that there is a non-cognitive kind of intelligence. And as Joanna shares with us, it helps us balance emotions when we go on, with our endeavors. We already learned that emotions come from the emotional brain and come from the unconscious part of our thinking. So it's an essential element in the composition of our being. And by understanding that it's there, it helps us to develop it and to balance its use. You see, we are keep telling the same thing, using different inputs, converging spiritist thinking with conventional science thinking. Yes, you have seen this slide, but later, a ninth kind of intelligence has been proposed, the spiritual intelligence. What would be it? Existentialist or spiritual intelligence would be a ninth kind of cognitive intelligence related to the ability to consider deeper questions of existence, to reflect on who we are, where we come from, why we die, where we are going. Spiritual intelligence. Gardner he's still alive, by the way, guys, is still reluctant to accept this intelligence. He justifies it, saying that scientists have not yet proven that it acts or requires specific areas of the brain. We'll see to that. There's a gentleman called Robert Emmons. He's a neuropsychologist from the University of California. He is a sort of religious guy. He's known for his investigation into psychoneurology and religions. And I'm citing here not work by Emmons, but a work published in a magazine by Catholic University in São Paulo by, I don't have the authors here, about the debate between Gardner and Emmons. They say, Emmons make a strong case that intelligence has a spiritual side. It is an existential involvement, full of meaning and value. For Emmons, This form of intelligence enables human beings to establish intimate contact, not only with what religions call divine, but with themselves and with the world and facts of life, finding in this a form of cognitive achievement that deserves the adjective of spiritual. That's an interesting point. Huh? Let's go and see how this idea is supported by others. There's an Austrian author called Viktor Frankl. João told me a few weeks ago that Divaldo occasionally mentions Frankl in his talks. He's not a spiritist, Viktor Frankl. He's I don't know if it's a scientist or researcher. Anyway, Viktor Frankl added ideas. He called spiritual intelligence noetic. Guys, noetic is just a synonym for spiritual. This comes, by the way, from Achilles Coelho and Miguel Mafu that wrote an article on the Psychological Journal of São Paulo University called The Spiritual and Religious Dimensions of Human Experience, Distinctions and Interrelations in Viktor Frankl's Work. So it's essentially an article about the work of this gentleman. And they tell us, humans and animals consist of a biological dimension, a psychological dimension, and a social dimension. However, humans differ from them because the noetic dimension is part of their being. So we have an additional dimension to the animals. At no time do humans leave the other dimensions, but the essence of their existence is in the spiritual dimension. Oh boy, this could come from a spiritist book of some kind. He continues, or Achilles continues, Achilles and Miguel. The spiritual dimension shows itself as the dimension of the experience of freedom and responsibility. Responsibility is not identified with a moralistic character by which the individual would be obliged to act in accordance with introjected norms, but it is characterized precisely by the ability to respond, that is, by the acting freedom at the time when a person responds or positions himself in front of present circumstances. So what Frankl is saying is that spiritual intelligence has to do with free will, in short. Continues Achilles, presupposes freedom to effect its positioning in the world. In its spiritual dimension, it is to speak above all of being responsible and of the human being aware of his responsibility. It's not freedom from biological, psychological, or social conditions. It's not, being in jail or not, to which every man is subject, but freedom to take a stand in the face of all circumstances, being them everyday circumstances or exceptional circumstances. Frankl clearly evolved on the concept. And let's bring you a even more recent author. Dana Zohar. She's a physicist, an American physicist and philosopher, whose husband is a psychiatrist, Ian Marshall, and they wrote a book called Spiritual Intelligence, the Ultimate Intelligence. So we are seeing the concept of spiritual intelligence evolving. This book, by the way, has been published on 2000, on the turn of the century, in its first edition. In Portuguese, it was translated only on 2013. My quotes here come from the original first edition in English. Just give you an appetite, or l'apéritif, how do you say that? A sneak preview? No, that's not the word I was looking for. Anyway, in this work, the author cites research by University of California in 1997. If anyone wants the author, I'll send you. On the existence in the human brain of something she calls a God spot, an area in our brain that would be responsible for the needs, the processing of spiritual experiences. So tells us Dana Zohar and Ian Marshall. This built-in spiritual center, and by the way, that's the way it's written in the English in the original, not center, but center. Center. But I believe that's the English. Anyway, this built-in spiritual center is located among neural connections in the temporal lobes of the brain. On PET scans, these neural areas light up whenever research subjects, whenever the guys being subjected to PET scans are exposed to discussion of a spiritual or religion topic. Isn't that interesting? And continues Dana on a more general concept of spiritual intelligence. He tells us, at the early part of the 20th century, the IQ, the intelligent quotient, became the big issue. The higher a person IQ, the theory went, the higher their intelligence. In the mid-90s, Daniel Goleman popularized research showing that emotional intelligence, EQ, is of equal importance. At the end of the 20th century, an array of recent, but so far undigested scientific data show us that there is a third Q, the SQ, the spiritual quotient. By the way, she used SQ obviously as a synonym of spiritual intelligence, not as a result of a test. Something to bring attention, from people. She continues, SQ, spiritual intelligence, gives us the ability to choose. It gives us our moral sense, an ability to temper rigid rules with understanding and compassion, and an equal ability to see when compassion and understanding have their limits. We use SQ to wrestle with questions of good and evil. We use it to envision and realize possibilities, to dream, to aspire, to raise ourselves out of the mud. Her words. It is in its transformative power, that SQ differs mainly from EQ, from the spiritual intelligence differs mainly from emotional intelligence. SQ has no necessary connection to religion. Conventional religion is an externally imposed set of rules and beliefs. The spiritual intelligence, as described in this book, is an internal ability of the human brain and psyche, understand spirit, a facility developed over millions of years, reincarnations, that allows the brain to find and use meaning in the solution of problems. Spiritual intelligence is the soul's intelligence with which we make ourselves whole. This lady on the photo at the left is Dana Zohar. She tells us that a person high in spiritual intelligence is likely to be a servant leader, someone who is responsible for bringing higher vision and value to others and showing them how to use it. In other words, a person who inspires others. Her words again, what I'm going to say now, I couldn't resist of placing it here. About her book, she says that this book finishes with a chapter, how to be spiritually intelligent in a spiritually dumb culture. Her words. So maybe it makes you curious to reading it. And a last paragraph from her. Through a more cultivated use of our spiritual intelligence, and through the personal honesty and courage that such cultivation requires, we can reconnect with the deeper sources and deeper meanings within ourselves. And we can use that reconnection to serve causes and processes much larger than ourselves. Joanna de Angelis has something to say about this. In that same book, Personal Triumph, the same chapter, The Thinking Being, she tells us, the discovery and verification of spiritual intelligence at this time provides an understanding of the complexity of the human soul. Analyzing the data provided by thought and developing the programs most compatible with its needs and aspirations in the complex movement of the search for fullness. This book was published in 2001. She continues, the areas in the brain in which the different intelligences are exteriorized are perfectly identifiable. But there is, however, a prominent light point that expresses in the brain the existence of that area of spiritual nature, propelling the being to the understanding of its transcendence and of its destiny towards infinity. This is my translation from the Portuguese, but I try to be very precise. I have to tell you that I looked all over for a PET scan image showing the God spots. I found many, but none reliable, and it's being badly used in some religious movements. So I'd rather not show something I'm not perfectly convinced that it's proper. Anyway, Joanna de Angelis tells us in 2001, remember, Dona Zoar book was published in 2000, was translated to part in 2013. The research of this came along in 1997. So we're talking things that are very, very, very synchronic. Joanna de Angelis continues. This light point or divine point is situated between the connections of neurons in the temporal lobes of the brain. It's not the pineal gland, okay? It's an area of activity in the center of the temporal lobe. Take off my, okay. Research carried out through the use of positrons allows us to verify that in discussions of a religious or spiritual nature, whenever the theme is about God and the spirit, the transcendental life and the values of the soul, an illumination in the referred place immediately takes place, demonstrating that this is where the spiritual intelligence is based, the parts of the brain that are activated. By the way, the original in Portuguese says positron. finalizing her thoughts, it is therefore this intelligence that leads to the heart of things and facilitates the understanding of the abstract, particularly when referring to the values of immortality of the soul, religious faith, universal causality, godness, love. Next to, this is the third to last slide, my slides. Just try to tie together everything. Remember, we began last month trying to define try to define intelligence, instinct, different points of view. We understood that instinct is something not reasoned upon. It's something in our unconscious that we have to control. We learned about the evolution of humanity, how we have been adapting our bodies to our needs and how we have been evolving in intelligence and intellect. We discussed the brain, how we have a brain that has been built like a castle with different stages and different levels. We studied Freud, that shows in his conceptuation how, our ego is constantly trying to adapt our instincts and our ethical and moral thoughts in the superego and compatibilize that. We saw intelligence that first we thought it was just rational reasoning, but I believe I have showed to you that it has multiple dimensions. Not only the cognitive intelligence here represented by IQ, that we can divide in 8 kinds of cognitive intelligences, but also emotional intelligence, that's our non-reasoning intelligence, and spiritual intelligence, it would be the part of our intelligence that is able or that is involved when we are dealing with the concepts we deal in Spiritist, meaning understanding where we come from, where we go to, what are errant spirits, etc., and how all that composes our intelligence. And that our spirit counts on that and our free will. And we know the mechanics now, I hope you do, and you know the theories, and you know what has been told to us by the spirits in our route towards evolution, towards improving ourselves. And we are in a very lower steps of this particular march. Anyway, what did I write here? That the multiple dimensions of our intelligence provides us with multiple capabilities in variable degrees, developed along the ages and reincarnations. We are allowed to learn and evolve with free will, using and developing such capabilities. Thus, it's up to each of us. And I will finish, and I still have time, João, don't look badly at me, with Emmanuel's point of view regarding the intelligent human. So, Emmanuel, in his book, Spirit's Religion, chapter 36, tells us about the intelligent human. And I have to point out 30 seconds. Jussara, the other day in her brilliant talk about a different subject, brought out this book. And this book is so interesting because it was written as a reconstitution of a number of spirit sections, actually the end of some mediumistic meetings around 1959, where at the end, the Spirit Emmanuel interacted with the present through a medium, of course, to discuss subjects. Memory does not fail me. It's a collection of like 60 or 90 or whatever. Anyway, Can you imagine being there, interacting with Emmanuel? I am sure that must have been so interesting. Anyway, the spiritual manual tells us, in fact, the intelligent human is not the one who only calculates, but the one who transfuses his own reasoning into emotion to understand life and sublimate it. Being able to master the riches of the world, the intelligent humans abstain from excesses to live simply, without disrespecting the needs of others. Keeping superior knowledge, the intelligent human does not hide himself in pride, but approaches the ignorant to help him instruct himself. This is my translation. I couldn't find a better word than ignorant. He continues, having the means to make others a slave to his interest, he works spontaneously for the pleasure of serving. And hoarding unassailable virtues, he does not shy away from living with the victims of evil, acting without derision or condemnation to free them from vice. And with this advice of Emmanuel on where we should go, I end this presentation. I hope you have enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis. Really, really excellent. We have time for quick questions. Anyone has a question here?
We're saying this.
Marlene was giving positive, I think. You know, I have a common question going back to that one slide that you brought on the, oh man, how the word escaped me, on the creationists and the evolutionists, right? That I think it's a very interesting subject that especially as spiritists we need to explore further, right? Because it's been such a clear division, science on one side against it, and religion in the other side, defending creationism, especially some more religious, fanatical religions here, right? How do you see this evolving? How do you think we are going to get out of the dichotomy of yes or no to a more reasonable way of finding the truth?
Well, you guys know that, in my opinion, things are what they are, and we cannot do anything about it. So nature is what it is. What we should be is not mystic about it, as Spiritist teaches us, and learn about it layer by layer. Specifically regarding those excesses, I wish I had a very good answer to that, but I believe there will always be descent, even to the obvious things. I mean, we see, flat earthers. Is that how you say in English, flat earthers?
Yes.
Still today, I would love to have, a plane trip to one of those guys. Would be great to hear what they say about it. Anyway, even with satellites and space stations and airplanes and flights like Origins and whatever, that if you were rich would be able to go to the space. there are still people who think that the world is flat. So I believe there will always be dissent. What I like is when I see this convergence, when I see scientific guys talking about intelligent design, accepting that some interference has to to have been present, because if it was not here, evolution would not have time to have happened as it happened. This is fantastic because it represents, new knowledge, openness of mind, conversion, and the more we talk about it, the more it moves. Oh well, I don't think I answered you, but what is I meant to do?
Yeah, no, I don't think we have an answer, right? I think we have to see how it evolves.
But guys, we are here among friends. Did you enjoy this subject? Was it okay? Not interesting?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you, Luis.
Because this comes from material that I have prepared on advanced Spiritist teaching. One of the essential concepts behind this number of classes, and I had, I think I did one or two with you guys, is to look at this convergence and both sides, the Spiritist side and the conventional conventional science side, regarding subjects, including instinctive intelligence. So, although it might not be interesting to some of you, I find it extremely appealing because it gives us instrument to discuss with non-spiritists, to build our own concepts, to grade and evaluate what we read and what people tells us. So I love it.
Yeah, I fully agree, Luis. And
I-
go ahead, Elmo.
Yeah, Luis, I really enjoyed it a lot. It's my topic that I like to read is anthropology. I'm really fond of anthropology, physical and cultural. And you make a comment that I was thinking of it, that the beauty of this lecture, of this presentation, is that this can be presented anywhere to any group of individuals who are willing to appreciate the topic, regardless of religion, of religiosity, or spirituality. It's open, and it's not limited at all. It's so open to anyone to enjoy that. I really like that anyone could come in completely related to spiritism, spirituality, religion, anything like that. And to go to the question or the comment of João, I think your presentation brings tremendous amount of hope in elimination or minimization of this duality that we confront right now, that João was expressing, and that is so obvious right now, that it's since they become so polarized on the two extremes. But your presentation itself defies that, because it shows an approximation of science and spirituality, not religion, spirituality. And I think you see the progress over there of this exercise to try to understand intelligence being purely from the material, exploring the more abstract, going to the emotional, and now into the spiritual. It's a very optimistic sign that we will have no choice, but progress is going to lead us towards the center and leaving the polarization and move together towards the center.
Thank you for your kind words. You had a question somewhere in the beginning of the presentation. Do you remember what was it?
You went along the way. It dissipated. Thank you.
So before we finish, Luis, I know you have another very interesting lecture that you finished your course with, which is on matter. So, if you want to join us in January, I can invite you to do a presentation on it on the next to last week of January, Sunday of January. Okay, so January has 5 Sundays again. Yes, so
just make the invitation. Right now, I haven't received anything yet, so it would be my pleasure.
Okay.
Oh, great.
You're officially invited for January 23rd for the lecture on matter that you gave on your closing of your class. Okay.
What I receive a golden lettered white paper